Hi, I'm Chris Runde. I'm an innovation consultant here at Ross Baruzzini, where innovation is made personal. And today, I'm excited to be on a call with my colleague, Michael Steinle. Um, I can remember the first time that I met Michael. I was thrilled to hear his background. I joined right when COVID-19 hit, and Michael's experience with Santa Clara County and pandemic planning is nothing short of fascinating. Um, so for this call, I wanted to talk a little bit about that experience, Michael, and get your perspective on how can the aviation community right now borrow some of those lessons learned, and what are some of those key questions that we really want to have all our industry partners, our airports, our airlines, and our government regulators thinking about as we look at resuming operation. So maybe to start, could you give a little background on your work and how you ended up at Ross Baruzzini?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a biochemist by education and started out my career doing environmental work and other risk-related work. And been doing resiliency and emergency preparedness work for over 30 years. 5 of those years were spent at Kansas City International Airport as the environmental health and safety manager. So I got exposed to the airport environment there. And then I spent about 10 years doing the public health and uh, bioterrorism and pandemic planning. One of the clients, as you mentioned, was Santa Clara County Public Health Department, which was one of the first agencies to implement their plan in relation to COVID-19. I also did a couple of state level plans that have also been implemented. So it's been kind of interesting watching those happen.
Wow. Well,
Uh,
like you said, it's something you don't want to have to be enacted, but when it is, you're thankful that you were thoughtful about it, right? And that um, you're seeing the results of it. Santa Clara, like you said, was one of the first out of the gate. And when we think of the key terms like flattening the curve and managing communications, I think they're seen now as a model for trying to manage this sort of unprecedented challenge. What's fun in our conversation so far is drawing the parallels from that work to the things that you and I are working on now relative to airports. And um, you're doing work now on the security side, but a lot of the conversations recently are angled towards health safety and how do we passengers and employees alike. So, what are your thoughts on the parallels between the pandemic planning and what aviation should be considering now?
well, I think there are some public health related processes that can be applied to airports to successfully protect employees, but also instill a level of confidence in passengers. Um, in the news, you've heard a lot about contact tracing. That's an important aspect of public health response and pandemic control or pathogenic control. It looks a little different among employees versus passengers, as employees are sort of a captured audience, and you can kind of better adapt the contact tracing procedures to them than the general public.
Yeah.
Places like Singapore, where they've made it compulsory for you to participate in contact tracing via applications. It's easier in concentrated small areas like that. In the United States, it's a little more difficult because we're spread out, and there's a freedom aspect to it and a privacy rights aspect to it too that can bring up some concerns. But that's one thing that's important. Another aspect is health screening. That is a normal part of public health response. Applied to airports, it could be a little bit difficult, but I think there are models out there that can be adapted that will instill confidence in the passengers and hopefully also help flatten the curve.
Yeah.
That's really, it is an economic crisis, but it's first and foremost a public health crisis. I think if you fix that problem, you eventually you address the economic issues as well.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on a point that you mentioned is, your pandemic plan covers a wide range of policies, procedures, technologies. Um, and it's not a cut and paste approach. I think you have to be thoughtful about where they apply and how you adapt them to, for instance, employees. You have sort of a captive audience. Airports are unique as they've got employees, they've got passengers, they've also got tenants who are sort of indirect workers there. So it's an interesting mix. And what's interesting from my perspective is the application of certain elements of a pandemic plan. Are there any that sort of jump out at you that airports should be considering right now?
Well, aside from the contact tracing and health screening, I mentioned those, but there's also personal protective equipment. And that, again, looks a little different from an employee standpoint versus a passenger standpoint. And I think there's some policy issues that have to be defined in order to implement PPE procedures or mandates or whatever.
Mhm.
Sanitation's also an important aspect, both for passengers, for planes, and for the physical environment of the airport itself. And then there's the public health campaigns. People have to know what proper procedures they should be following in order to not get infected and also to not spread the virus. I think technology is a key has a key role in some of this, particularly in the sanitation aspects. We've seen some positive uses of UV applications for cleaning and disinfecting physical environments. Beyond that, I think the contact tracing and some level of health screening is going to become a reality for airports at some point, and in some way. Obviously, the challenge there is balancing several things: the privacy situation, but also not impacting airport operations in a huge way. You don't want to add time to what some passengers already consider to be a process.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that it's streamlined. Um, I I think there's some benefit in looking at what public health departments do from a health screening standpoint and adapt that to an airport environment.
Yeah, this is going to push the airports into an area where they previously haven't had to operate, right? I mean, the screening for health. I mean, there's discussions now with thermal imaging, um, even testing internationally. Etihad's doing some of that. Uh, what's unclear to me is, let's say that you get a temperature above 100.3. Who's taking action, and what is that action? It seems like there's lots of questions around that right now. And from your perspective, maybe is that where maybe a health department might have the expertise, or someone airport may need to partner to complement their skills?
Most definitely. I mean, public health officers, generally speaking, at the county level, have some broad authorities during a pandemic to do certain things. We haven't seen the funding and the interaction at this point, from my perspective, necessary to integrate good public health policy in airports, and I'm hopeful that will happen as time
Yeah.
goes on here. But again, it comes down to meeting some public health goals while at the same time not impeding too much on airport goals, which is
Yeah.
customer experience and getting from point A to point B in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. And you alluded to the importance of communications in a response like this. And I'm wondering, the conversations we're having now, both with our airport partners, but also our federal friends, is the impact of a nationwide approach versus a state by state or an airport by airport one. Um, from your perspective, do you think some national consistency would be helpful for the
I
passenger?
actually think it's vital. Um, I come at this from the angle of having done planning for things other than pandemics, earthquake planning and all kinds of other catastrophic disaster planning. And those are always different because they're generally focused. You don't have an earthquake that impacts the entire country. You don't have a hurricane that impacts the entire country. This impacts the entire country. And if I'll use a fishing analogy, if you have a hole in the net, you start losing fish.
Yes.
Similarly here, if one airport is doing it one way and another airport's doing it another way, suddenly you've got gaps in your coverage, and that increases the chance of exposure among a broader population. So ideally, both from a transportation standpoint and from a public health standpoint, a centralized approach and a centralized focus on testing and vaccine development is I think vital going forward to more quickly get us back to normal. So to speak. And I would emphasize too that that's going to be a new normal. It's not going to be the old normal, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and underlying that national picture, the importance of having some consistency is the fact that we are a network, and you're only as good as the weakest node. So you could lock down your airport and sanitize everything, but when that first arriving passenger comes in and they're contaminated, it's something that can undermine confidence at the very least, if not cause a health concern. So, what's interesting now is all of the moving pieces, figuring out who owns what part of the process. I think in every scenario, there's public-private partnerships that have to evolve, and clear delineation of roles and responsibilities. As we sort of wrap up this first call and hopefully a series with you on, what lessons we can learn, are there any questions that we should be asking ourselves in the industry? Anything that, from your perspective, is going to be critical as we're defining the roles and what that quote unquote new normal may be?
Yeah, I think the main question from an airport standpoint is what's going to instill confidence in the public to start flying again at the same or somewhat normal levels prior to COVID-19. And, I think from a personal standpoint, understanding that there's a systematic process in place to identify people who might have been exposed and to try to isolate them, will instill the confidence necessary to get people flying again.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy. I think we all know that, but we have to work together to come up with strategies to meet those confidence goals. Another question is, how do we balance the airport operational goals with the public health goals? There are defined public health goals. If you listen to Dr. Fauci and some of the others talk about what defines a flattened curve. How does an airport impact those criteria, and how can what strategies can be put in place to help achieve those goals while also not trampling all over the airport operational goals?
Yeah.
That's a big question that is not just an airport issue, but among critical infrastructures in general. How do we help meet the public health goals and maintain that critical infrastructure?
Yeah. That's happening, interestingly, as states are starting to open up, and this is the reality of Skype now. Tell my kids to keep quiet. Will, I'm on the phone call. Sorry. It's real life, right? There we go.
Absolutely.
But Michael, it's genuinely been a thrill to work with you and pick your brain on all this stuff. So thank you for taking a few minutes on this video call today. I'm hoping we have a chance to follow up again, as this is a quickly evolving situation, and there's always areas to dive into. So thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you. I look forward to talking a little bit about how technology can be used in this endeavor too. There's lots of it out there. We gotta keep watching it and see what's available.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again.
You bet. Thank you.